So yesterday was HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and jQuery forms the skin. What we're seeing a lot of in the last 4 or 5 years, and more so, is the web app. And I think of it as all of the complexity in the browser that is not the skin. So if you've got lots and lots of data coming in, we saw a little bit of that yesterday. We saw a JSON object come in. You may be pulling in streams from many different vendors. Some examples of web apps, or very complex web apps that you might use every day, is Gmail or Dropbox, or even the Facebook page is a very, very complex thing. If you think about, you've got a chat window, you've got alerts, a wall, friends, all sorts of things going on. And if there's a massive team of developers all working on the front end, the code can get really, really messy. I was talking to Alex, where is he? He was showing me a jQuery built application. You said it was almost impossible to maintain because it was loads and loads and loads of functions written in JavaScript, one after another, that all called each other and all referenced the DOM. So if you sort of multiply that by 100 and try and do a page like Facebook, it's going to be a nightmare. We need a way to partition code, and that's where front-end frameworks come in. Another thing I mentioned yesterday was the speed with which technology is changing within the JavaScript world, and frameworks are coming and going. We've seen Knockout, we've seen Ember. I'm really hesitant to invest time into learning something that may be gone in a year.
Right.
And I tend to wait until I can see a clear market dominance of an emerging technology, and then I jump into it full force. I was concerned about Angular replacing Backbone. Will it? And that was a big question. Is it Angular versus Backbone, or is it Angular and Backbone? And after doing quite a few courses on each and spending a lot of my own time on each, I've come to the conclusion that it's going to be Angular and Backbone. One is not going to replace the other. I think they both have a place in the market. So this slide might be misinterpreted. It's not with. You don't use the two together in the same application. It's one or the other. In the marketplace, one's not going to replace the other. Another important thing is the router, especially in today's world of social media. You know, have a link that will load the app through to a certain state that the app's in. So that's become, of course, the division of code. If you've got,
sorry, Joe.
Yeah.
Are you going to delve into that some more?
Yeah.
I didn't quite follow the router.
The router, it's all based on the anchor tag or hashtag that you'll see in the URL. And
When you say hash, you mean the rest of URL?
Yeah. After the HTML.
After the sharp side.
Yeah, I call it a pound.
Okay.
Or crosshatch. The last thing that really interests me is data binding. And I put it in there because it's just really cool. That's the ability for, well, yesterday we saw jQuery go in and alter the HTML. Data binding is all about, I don't want to have to change the HTML. I just want to change the variable or object in memory, and the HTML will change all by itself because it's bound to that particular variable. That's what data binding is. So on to my visual slides. With Backbone, I chose a BMW because with BMW you could have a 3 Series BMW and go for an intimate date with a girl or guy. You could get your 5 Series M Sport and do a lap around a racetrack. Or you could get the X5, put the kids in the back, stop at the grocery store and fill it up full of groceries. These are all different ways you can drive around with a BMW.
I'm joking. It's beautiful.
It's a
no, because
beautiful
it's
car.
actually a great example of engineering, right? You know.
Yeah. Angular, on the other hand, is a Ferrari Formula One.
Nice.
Would you do your grocery shopping in this? You wouldn't have anywhere to put the groceries. You know, would you want to turn the air conditioning on and listen to some music in the comfort of your X5? No, you've got an open air thing. But if you want to do a lap around the racetrack, you're going to kick the pants off the BMW 5 Series M Sport. because it's a purpose-built machine to do something really, really well. And that's why I've come to the conclusion that Angular won't replace Backbone. There's too many situations where Backbone will be the choice. There's also clear situations where Angular is the choice. And what I'm going to try and do is delve into some code. And since I'm in a room mostly full of coders, I'm going to try and show you why through code that I've come to this conclusion. Let me just get rid of some of this.
How long have these frameworks been around now?
Maybe 4 or 5 years. Actually, Angular and Backbone started at the same time. Angular wasn't really heard of for many years, whereas Backbone became very, very popular. And that's because what Angular attempted to do was much, much harder. And it's only sort of now that it's really exploding. I'm going to pull these guys out of the public folder just for now. And I'm going to sort of divert quickly to Node. I have a really quick Node app here. We did mention it yesterday. Node is server-side JavaScript. I have a little, a little script here, which is going to start a server. And everything appears in the public folder. So to do that, I just type Node app. And we have a server on port 3000.
Actually, this technology is much more interesting than Backbone.
I would love to.
So that's the backend one. That's the backend one.
It's comparing to Java, to Scala, to something else.
It's amazing, and I've been using a lot, but maybe soon we can do a little bit of that. So the public folder is what is in my server, and I'm going to throw in some things here. I'll show you what's in them. I wonder, can you read that font, or do you need it bigger?
It's fine.
It's okay. I was just wondering if I should. Here we go. Let's go to 18. So these files here, I've got an HTML file, a loader GIF, another HTML file. Oops, I went in the wrong area. And home HTML. Now, home and home Angular HTML are almost identical. Is a blob of copy describing the series and a button and an image at the top. It's here, it's exactly the same. The only difference is I've had to add this into the HTML, and we're going to get to that when we hit get Angular. The other page here is the same. Page A, it's a blob of copy with a p tag. And the app I'm going to build is going to pull those in using a get that we saw yesterday and load it into a view. So this is the Backbone app, and we've got an empty file here. What is it called? BB. And the JavaScript inspector, which we saw yesterday, will alert us of errors. So I was also showing you a place where I pick up a lot of stuff. It's CDN.js. So I'm going to CDN.js for Bootstrap because I want to have some free CSS classes. If you do ever do this, it's a really fast way to get chunks of CSS that will style stuff. So just scroll down and grab Bootstrap min, and we'll need to bring it in. So I think it's link type equals text. And I also want to bring in Bootstrap itself. So that would be script type equals text class. Equals. And I'm going to bring in a few different ones. So I'm going to bring in 3 different files here. The ones that I must bring in, which are dependencies for Backbone, cd_njs is underscore. Backbone will not run without it. So keep that in mind. You need to bring that in. We have underscore. I'm also going to bring in jQuery. I'm just pulling the latest and greatest one. And finally, Backbone. Now, jQuery is not a dependency for Backbone, but I highly recommend it. The reason they did not make it a dependency is because some people use YUI instead. Yahoo's version of jQuery, Yahoo UI, I think it stands for. You do need something to manipulate the DOM. It works so well with jQuery or YUI, and it helps you partition the code. The other thing I'm going to grab is a little bit of CSS, which I pre-prepared here. Not much, just enough so that we can not have a mess on the screen. And you'll see that I'm also going to use classes from the Bootstrap that I brought in. And I also need some DOM elements, which are here. And once again, it's very, very basic. So the DOM elements we have is a container called myNav, 2 buttons. One of them is commented out, which I'll uncomment later. And we have an empty container called AppPage, ID AppPage. And everything that we do is going to appear right in here. That's all the HTML we need. JavaScript should handle all the rest. So the fact that we included Backbone has given us several objects that we can, there's the button that's just refreshing there, we can extend. And this is how Backbone will work. I'm just going to work, normally you'd link your JavaScript files in, but just for today, I think it's better that I just keep it all in one file so that we can move quicker. So the first thing you need in Backbone is a router. And to get that, we extend Backbone's router. And we drop an object in it, and we'll have an initialize. It's all key value pairs. And initialize is an anonymous function, well, a function that's paired to that key. And we need routes. And routes is just an object. That's all we need in the router. We also need a view. And to get that, we also extend Backbone's view. So I'm going to call it home view for the home page. And I'm extending Backbone's view. And once again, you'll see key value pairs. The minimum that you need to get this running is one called L, which is a string. You'll need initialize, which is a function. You'll need events, which is an object. And you'll need a render, which is a function. Now, there's one last thing I forgot, which is, do you remember yesterday we did this thing called document ready? And I think it was Alex very sharply picked up that the code was executing even before the DOM had sort of arrived, and we need to detect for that as well. Document ready. So there's our document ready. Let's just quickly refresh. We've got no errors. So within the document ready, we need to instantiate the app, which is a new router. And we need to start. I'm sorry? The round. We'll see.
Damn.
On the first side, Joe, Backbone is very big bullshit.
Is very big bullshit. That's fine. Remember the BMW Formula One. There's a reason why I chose that, and you'll see once we get.
Something similar to Swing applications, like events, some other stuff. But
Let's talk about it at the end.
okay.
I'm going to go really quickly, and you'll see what I'm trying to point out here. So we didn't get an error. I'll save that. Refresh that. This is Backbone's now running. It's not doing anything because we haven't populated our fields, but I'm going to start throwing that information in. The view, you'll see this ID here. We need to tie that to a view. So that's where L comes in, and you put in that. That's our mark that binds this view to that particular element. And what happens is when it's instantiated, you'll get another property called this.$L, which will be jQuery wrapped version of that string. And Backbone will handle that for you. In the render function, we'll say this.$L, and I'm just going to say HTML hello. And in the routes, we'll specify some routes. So we'll have nothing for a home route, and I'll call handle home route. And I'm going to create another route. On this one, I'll call page A. And I'll create here. Page A route. So these two guys need to be declared. So they become key value pairs within the router. So this becomes a function. And I need another one for that one there. And what would I do within these? The most obvious thing is to call the render function of the view. This.homeView.render. I need to instantiate the home view as well, and that's done in initialize. So I'd say this.homeView equals new home view. Let's see it working. So here we've got the word hello, and what's happening is it's running through its little trajectory. It's picking up the route, calling the home view render function, which is going on in here. But we want to activate the other button and have another view. So let's just enable that, and we'll. Yeah. But
that's not the point.
It's not the point. What we're doing is we're building the framework which other developers do. Because I could hand off this to a developer and say, build a page in there. And I could hand off this to an entirely different developer and say, build a page in there. You get my point? And what they put in render is up to them. So page A view here, it's exactly the same thing. I could put the word page A. And this view here needs to be instantiated as well. So this dot, and this router here will control everything. I probably wouldn't hand that off to anyone. So page A view would equal to new. So here we're starting to see how an app can be divided between 4 or 5 different developers, and they can start throwing stuff in. But I want to progress on to pulling stuff in from the server. And then I'm going to redo the same thing with Angular, and you'll start to see the difference. So have we got the route set up? So here we've got both routes. Each of those routes will call this function. So this would be page A render, and that should call here. Let's hope I haven't made a typo. And there, we've got it working. And you can see, you were asking earlier what's going on. It's picking up off the URL to pull in the different things. That's all the, when we extend Backbone, we're getting all of the different things of.
If you manipulate the URL, how's the code going to handle it?
They're in the router. Actually, I'll show you. It's good that you asked that. Backbone route. But there's lots of different options here. You'll start to see, where is it? Here, you can have a default route. You can pass in arguments. You can pass in nothing and take the whole URL and split it as a string and start chopping it up and do whatever you want with it. There's every which way you can pull that in.
One that doesn't exist, then it's just going to.
You can have a default. You can have a default route set up here, and then call handle bad route is often what I'll create if I want to detect for that. So another way I'm not going to work off this. I'm just going to work off one for now because I don't want to waste your time too much. What I often do here is I'll add in another property and call it template. And for now, I'm just going to drop in that image that you saw, the loading GIF here. And you'll see that this is just a piece of HTML. And instead of saying this.$l.html here, I'll put this.template. Now, there's something really, really unusual going on here. And it's to do with this. This is something unusual about Backbone. They've set up a proxy because normally this would refer to the function here. But in Backbone, it doesn't. In Backbone, anything top level, like initialize or render, this will refer to the entire object here. So when I say this.template, it's actually going to pick up this. And that's something that a lot of people who start with Backbone go, oh, what? Normally within JavaScript, this would refer to the function I'm in. So if you start working with Backbone, or if you inherit a Backbone project, that's something to watch out for. So let's just quickly check that that's working. There's our loaded GIF. And I also want to throw in the get. Remember yesterday we used get to get an image off Facebook? In my initialize function, I'm going to say $.get. And get takes a path and a callback function. I should have put this here. And this is where, because we have a function within a function, now if I say this, it's going to refer to this function here. So I need to, this is an old trick, old JavaScript trick. You say var self equals this, and I'll refer to self. And now I'm referring to this function here, which will point me to render. So I'll say self.template equals data, and data will be what we're pulling in from the get.
self.table.
Oh, thank you. I'm just going to throw a little console log here. And I'll say data arrived. Oh, I need a path. Home.html. So home.html was this guy. Some copy about The Walking Dead, a picture and a button underneath. So this get should get it and stick it in. Now, we've got a problem because the get will arrive after all of this is executed. So it's going to populate data, but render will already have been called. So
Is it going to override the template
no.
of the image?
This is where we need to tell it to do that. So here the GIF is still there. The data has arrived, but we haven't called render again. Self.render. And there it is. We've pulled all that data in. But this creates another problem because if I do this on the page view as well, they'll override each other whenever the gets come in. If there's a delay getting that and I've already navigated to a page, one will override the other. So there's many different ways to get around this. The common way that people do is they hang a variable in the router and call it current page, and then you check for that. But that's not really modular. That doesn't keep everything within the view here, and it makes it dependent on a variable that someone else may alter or change. It's a really quick trick is to say this dot $L, and we're using jQuery's attribute method, and I'm going to create an attribute called page, and I'll put the word home because this is a home page. And over here, before I render it, I'll just say if self.$L.attr page equals home, then
It looks like you miss here the brackets.
I did?
No.
No. Oh,
I think that jQuery method
Yes,
takes
yes,
an object.
exactly.
oh, it does? My bad. Sorry. In which case, you're right. My bad. So here, I'm not gonna fill in the page A. I'm gonna copy and paste that. How page A will work. This is page A. We'll see it's all the same stuff. And I've marked out where the differences are. There's 3 differences here going on here, where I've had to put page A, page A, page A. And so now we should be able to move back and forth between our pages here. So this is a fast way to partition code. At the moment, I've got a view attached to each different page. You could have a single page application with no router and 5 views, one underneath the other, and divide it up between 5 different developers. Of the Photoshop, my little Photoshop slide here, we've addressed the router and the division of code and organizing it. We haven't addressed data binding. I'm going to come back to Backbone and show you how Backbone does its data binding after I've done Angular. Because data binding is so deeply nested in the DNA of Angular, you cannot get rid of data binding. What I've done here is I've shown you that Backbone can function without data binding. And there may be reasons why you may not want it. There's a bunch of other features to Backbone which I haven't put in there, like models and collections. One of the reasons why I didn't put that in this example is you may want to bring in developers who may not know Backbone. There's a whole plethora of developers out there who know jQuery really, really well, and JavaScript really, really well, and they know Photoshop and CSS really, really well. You may want to pull in some of that talent and give them this and say, knock yourself out. Here's the view. Work within that. You don't need to know Backbone because I'm controlling the framework. And you can work within this framework here, work within the render, and go to town. They can not even use the events here. They can use jQuery and $everything and attach events to buttons and build away, and the framework will handle it. There's no need to have data binding or a model or collections or any of that. I'm going to touch on one last thing that because I think we have time. How long have we been going for? 20 minutes. So in the events here, the home page here had a button here. There's a way to listen to that and have Backbone handle it, because as Alex saw the other day, if you're constantly referencing the DOM, you'll have a whole list of functions and it starts to get messy. What's listening to what? What Backbone's attempting to do here is to have all of my listeners in one place, and it all sits in this events object. And I would specify the name of the ID of that button, and all I need to do is drop it in here. And what you do is you list the name of the event, which would be a click, the ID of the button, and over here a handler. Handle button 1. And then I have to write that function for that, which I'll just drop down here.
I still embarrassed. The button is space separated. Why the function must be referenced by string?
What Backbone does is takes this and splits the string on the space and looks for the event and then what it's targeting.
There are a lot of places where I can make an error, just a typo,
Yeah.
and my page will be corrupted.
Exactly.
Because this framework is very error prone.
So that's something I'm going to touch on later.
Why did you select this framework to demonstrate? You know?
I think.
Don't you agree with me?
Well,
I would like to see Joe next time, Alexei, bring in some rotten fruit.
throw it.
and then you don't have to just throw it.
So
easier.
I want to address the question though.
Joe's.
The purpose of me doing this is to pick the 2 biggest frameworks that are in the market today and show them to you, and you can decide if you don't like it or not. And they do different things, as I demonstrated or tried to show you with the car analogy. You're thinking Formula One, and I know you've had a bit of experience with Angular, and you'll start to see how Angular is a Formula One. But just like the Formula One car, you want to pick up the groceries, you can't do it. There's a lot of things that Angular can't do where you might have to fall back to Backbone.
Do these frameworks have, it seems like it's very different from the standard JavaScript that I remember coding in. Like there seems to be a very specific way of calling things or declaring things that are very specific to the framework.
Yes, and what I've done here...
It seems like almost learning another language.
You're exactly right. I've covered all the key points that Backbone is going to pick up for a minimal viable product of a Backbone web app. Mm-hmm. There's boilerplates out there that are much more verbose than this. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to console log to say, whoops, console.log to say button called. Hopefully I wasn't distracted and made a typo, but let's just run that. My button called. So here you see, and every event handling on the view can be all placed here, which, Alex, when you picked up that job and you had 20 different JavaScript functions, one after another, and it was probably took you 3 days to read through it all and just even get an idea of how it worked. This will speed that up. When you've got all your events here, your event handler is listed under there, any DOM manipulation happens in the render function here. I want to move quickly because I'm falling behind a little. There's because I want to show you the same thing in Angular and show you how much less code it is, but how much harder it is to debug. Okay, so I'm going to rebuild this with Angular. And the only difference is instead of pulling in home.html, I'm going to pull in home Angular. And that's because of that button here. I won't be able to find the DOM element from JavaScript and attach a listener because Angular doesn't work that way. Angular works in a completely different way. What Angular does, and where's my Formula One? Because I like it. Angular sort of, in order to go faster or become the Formula One, it reverses everything. It says, hey, JavaScript and jQuery, stop reaching into the DOM and manipulating it and treating the DOM as a slave. It flips it on its head and says, DOM, you're now the top. You're top tier. And this philosophy even goes right down to the name Angular. The word Angular is an adjective to describe a bracket, which is this bracket here. Right there. The greater than or less than that we see in HTML, that's why they called it Angular. And that's where the name Angular comes from. I want to read through the HTML and know what's happening. My purposes of this framework is to have a router. I want to divide the code between multiple developers and organize it. And lastly, touch on data binding. But with Angular, data binding is part of its DNA. So before I build it, I'm just going to show you a quick demo of Angular, which you can find. There's loads of them on the internet. Where is it here? Intro. I'm just going to pull intro in. And intro, I don't think there's no get calls in intro, so I think I'm just going to drag it onto a browser and show you what's going on. Let me open it up. So this is a very, very simple Angular app. Here we have a link to Angular, which we're pulling in. Here we have Bootstrap CSS, our HTML, and here we have the JavaScript, which is now serving the HTML. So the way Angular works is right at the top level you put ng app, and you can assign it to a string, but in this case I'm just writing ng app, and that says, hey, Angular wants you to do your business. It parses the HTML and starts assigning code to directives. This here is a directive, ng controller, and it's going to look for the book controller, which I've got here. And this is a very simple controller. All I'm doing is creating an array of objects, and the objects have some books. Just like in Backbone, Amelia brought up the point that it's like learning a new language, and she's dead right. There's a lot of complexity. It's like a meta language on top of JavaScript. You have to learn all the key words, so to speak, that that particular framework uses. And scope is one of the big ones that comes with Angular. So this scope is attached to this DOM element here that opens there and closes there. And it affects all the DOM elements inside it. Scopes can be nested. You can have a scope built within a scope, and variables defined in the top scope will be carried down into the bottom scope, the child scope. They can be reassigned in the child scope, and they will not affect the parent scope. So scope becomes a really complex thing. There's also a thing called root scope, which I'm not going to get into here. Also inside the DOM here, I'm referencing certain variables in the scope. I'm referencing owner name, which is up here. I've called it Neo. I'm referencing book and book name and book author. And I've also attached a model directive to go to this scope variable here. So when I run it, Angular is looking at this li, and it is iterating through using this directive here every book and printing them out. It's then asking for an input and attaching that to owner name. So here. And the way Angular works with its data binding, because I said data binding is part of its DNA, is when I update the variable, the HTML updates automatically. So let's go quickly. So here's my Angular page, which is empty, and I'll just open up the inspector. And inside here, we're starting with another empty document. I'm going to cheat a little and pick up stuff from intro just to save typing. We want some bootstrap, which we'll throw at the top. We also want to steal stuff from our Backbone app. We want this CSS here, which I'll drop into the Angular here, just to give us a little bit of styling. I don't think I need anything else on Backbone. Oh, we've got JavaScript, jQuery, and underscore. I'll just steal one of those. I'm going to paste it in here and empty it. So one thing you might have noticed when I showed you that quick intro Angular app, there was no jQuery at all. And it's really strongly advised that you don't load jQuery when you're working with Angular. I'm going to show you a quick bit.ly link, which I encourage you to write down. It was yesterday's speech. Here. Because this, I'll just leave it up there, and I'll show you where it leads to. It leads to this Stack Overflow thread, which has a huge number of upvotes, incredible number of upvotes, and 3,000 stars here. How do I think in AngularJS if I have a jQuery background? Use the bit.ly and have a look at it. The essence of what it says. Hang on. Let me speak. The essence of what it says is to do with the philosophy and the thinking. jQuery and JavaScript that we did yesterday, the DOM was the slave to JavaScript. I want my JavaScript to reach into the DOM, look for an element, and change it. If you use that approach when you're coding Angular, you're going to run into loads and loads and loads of errors, because the way to think with Angular, the DOM is in control. I'm going to put a directive in the DOM, and it's going to reach out to JavaScript and find the right JavaScript that is attached to that DOM element. That one particular thread says it better than anything else. So I've got CSS. I need to get Angular itself, and I always use cd_njs Angular. And you'll see here a little version drop down. Angular is constantly evolving. I haven't used 1.2.18. I've only used 1.216. I think 1.8 has only come out in the last week. Let's grab, Angular. We need the main Angular, not animate, cookies, CSP loader. So here's Angular, the main one. Copy that, and I'm going to paste it in here. And to build what we want to do with our web app, we also need the route, which is right here. And it's actually exactly the same URL, but with -route. So I'm just going to cheat and type -route. Just going to make sure these load. Oh,
yeah, Angular in the wrong spot. It was Angular-route.me.js at the end.
Oh,
Yeah, maybe.
Whoops, you're right. Thank you, Uli. Maybe I should have copied and pasted. So one of the most important parts of Angular is we need our little call out to say, hey, this is an Angular app. So it's ng-app. And here I'm going to assign it to my app. And down in my head here, I'm going to open up some JavaScript here. Script type equals text. JavaScript. And here, it's really important to declare the app first. So I'll say var my app, and that's this guy up here, equals angular.module. And inside that, I'll write my app, and I need to have an array of dependencies. If you don't have the router, you still need to have that empty array or it'll crash. But because I have the router, I want to include ng-route. I also need to declare a controller, and I need actually some HTML in there. Let's get the HTML from my snippets. That's all Backbone. Here we go, Angular HTML. It's very similar to the Backbone HTML. We've got our div where things are going to arrive in here, our pages, and we've got a nav, the same CSS class, and the same two buttons, home and page A. The buttons, all they're doing is sending in a route. That's it. Everything's going to hang off this controller here and ng-view. They're the two directives that HTML is going to say, I'm the boss, go look for the JavaScript that's connected to these. I need my controller. Declare. So the controller looks like this, myapp.controller. And let's split that open. Into this we're going to pass app control, which is a string that matches here. We're also going to pass an array. The array is going to contain a whole bunch of stuff. Scope. It's going to contain log. The last thing that I need here is a function. And here I want to pass in scope and log. And I can now reference them inside the function. So I want to have some kind of button handler here. Now that's all I need. For the router, I do myapp.config, and I need to specify routes. And here I need a function for the same thing. Which I'll split open. There's something in Angular called route provider, which I can then reference inside it here. Oops. $route provider, and here I specify my routes. You use when. And I might put a route. And these are exactly the same as what's in the A tags. Here we've got page A route. I also need to say what happens when that route is called. And this is what I love about Angular, is all I have to do is pass in an object and write template URL and the file name, home.angular.html. That's all I have to do. There's no writing of get calls or anything. Angular will do all of that for me. So this would be page A, HTML. So you'll see I'm using a slightly different HTML partial in my public folder. I'm going to use home.angular.html because the div at the end needs this directive here. When I was using home.html for Backbone, it was just a regular button. There's no directive in it. What I was doing in this case, jQuery was searching for this here. For Angular, I don't even have an ID in it because it's the other way around. When I bring in this partial, Angular will say, oh, there's a new piece of HTML. Quickly, let's parse the HTML and assign a new directive to this handle button. So I'm going to say $scope dot equals function, And let's split that open. And here I'm going to use the $log.log and say Angular button click. Now, this is all the code that I needed to do exactly what I did with Backbone. It's far less localhost. But this is the Angular. Here we have Backbone, and we're changing between two different views. And here we have Angular, doing exactly the same thing. There is another side of Angular here that in my code, I haven't got it ready, but you can add another piece, I think it's in here, to have template caching. I'd need to Google it, but that's a way around to stop it making a call. Another important difference that you'll see in Angular is if I look at the elements, I'm just going to put this underneath. Now I'm going to open up and have a look. When I change buttons inside my view, my page is changing. What it's doing is it's destroying the contents of the view every time I change. It's deleting those objects. That's an out-of-the-box solution of Angular. When I was doing the Backbone, remember all that code I wrote? If I look at the view, I have control over what I'm doing in render. Here I'm using the jQuery method HTML, which destroys. I could, down in my router, instantiate every page and have them stacked one under another, and inside render I could just hide and show. And so I have the ability to change the functionality of the web app, which I can't in Angular. So to recap on what have we got here, and I'm going to go back to my slide here. Why do we need the framework in the first place? One, the most important reason for me is to divide and organize the code. Both frameworks do that. Another important reason is the router, because whether it's changing views or whether I feel a really important thing is social, is being able to share a state of the app. I can pass a link that when someone clicks on it, not only will it load the app and go to the home view, but it might navigate to the page C view, whatever it is, and bring up some data. All of that can be passed in the URL. So the router is a very important part of the framework. Data binding I also include because it is a new thing and it's really, really cool to have to not worry about the DOM. And there is a lot of data binding in Backbone, even though I haven't shown you. Backbone tends to be a lot more code when you're finished. Visually, you'll see many, many more lines. Backbone integrates well with jQuery and YUI. And of course, that means it integrates well with all of the plugins that come with that. Angular, on the other hand, is very, very fast and lightweight. It often is far less code once it's done. So when you pass it to another developer, they can read it very easily and see what's going on. Angular can be very hard to debug because what gets logged to the console is not necessarily helpful. And this can slow down development time or increase development time. There's a Stack Overflow thread that encourages you how to think Angular, and I've given you that tiny URL. If anyone didn't get it down, contact me afterwards. Angular routes create a get call every time unless you use the template caching. I mentioned Angular doesn't play well with plugins and jQuery. So going back to my slide here of the BMW and the Ferrari, you can really see why it's going to be Angular and Backbone, not Angular versus Backbone. There's a couple of things that I skipped over, and that was data binding in Backbone. I've got a pre-built example to show you that. Here. I pull this over into my public folder and open it up. Sorry, let's close all these guys. And let's bring it up. So it's the same code here, and I'll show you what I'm doing. So if you want data binding in Backbone, you can extend the Backbone model. And here I call it Zombies model. I did that because of the Walking Dead page we have. Down here in the home view, when I initialized the home view and instantiated that piece of code, here I've written this.listen to this.model. And I'm going to listen to a change event and call render. And once again, this is a very manual way to do it. In Angular, you don't have to do it. It's inbuilt. Further down here, to make it work inside the router, when I instantiate the home view, I pass in the model. That you probably inferred, because up here, how else would it find this .model? And here I've commented out a piece of code. I'm going to show you why in a sec. So what's going to happen here is when I hit this page, whenever I hit this page, it's going to call this.render, which is home view this.render. And at the end of this.render, I've added this line of code here, which is to find the p tag, which is our body of text, and append a string attacked by, and reference the model and the variable name. So that's what's happening here. We see attacked by biter. But this doesn't demonstrate how a variable will change the DOM. I need that variable to change and see the DOM change. And that's where I've got commented out piece of code. So if I uncomment it, it's our friendly timeout from the other day. After 3 seconds, I'm going to grab the model and change the string name from biter to shambling horror. And what should happen is, because we've bound the DOM to the model up here, the DOM should change. Let's see it. I'm refreshing it. 1, 2, 3, shambling horror. I didn't have to go in and use the jQuery method and say, hey, let's go and find it and change it. Here we've bound it, and the binding happens with this listen to in the home view. Initialize here. When we set up this line here, we're binding exactly like Angular does. There are tests out there that show the speed with which these two frameworks work. And this binding here is our racetrack. If you grab the BMW 5 Series M and go around the racetrack, you're going to clock a slower time than if you grab the F1. And that's the same with our frameworks. Angular is going to bind and get that stuff to the DOM 10 times quicker than Backbone. So if you're building something like in RTB, where you have a huge amount of data that needs to be constantly written to the screen, it may run a lot slower in Backbone than if you did it with Angular, and also be a lot more code. So that's a clear choice of, hey, this is a great idea, use Angular.